Hey, first, can I say it's a real privilege to be at APU Chapel. You know, a lot of incredible things happen in Chapel, don't they? Even some crazy things. For example, I'm a Biola grad. Don't hold that against me. Easy. But I met my wife in Chapel. I was a sophomore, and I look across the gym, and I see this freshman named Veronica, and I was like, I need to do something now. There's a lot of dirt bags at Biola, okay? And so I found her after chapel, and I said, hey, my name's Palmer. Would you want to go to Knott's Berry Farm Friday night? And she's like, I got to babysit Friday night. So now a lesser man would have walked away, but I came right back with, forget about dirty Knott's. How about Disneyland? And she said, yes, I'll get out of the babysitting. And then we kissed on the Matterhorn. Boom. Boom goes the dynamite. And she's here this morning, by the way, right here, down here. So, and she's off. I want to start by saying thank you to Dr. Leslie Wickman and your chaplain, Tim. Thank you so much for having me. It's a privilege. It really is a privilege to speak to college students because, like Dean Terry said, you are the hope of the church for the future generation. God is going to use you. Like Dean Terry said, my name is Palmer Chinchin. I'm a writer and I'm a speaker and I help lead a church in Arizona. But what I'm most about is trying to convince people that this world is a broken place. But it doesn't have to be that way because God wants to use your one and your very important life to change that. And not everybody gets that. But I've spent about half my life in Africa and I've seen things I think maybe a little bit differently. A single-engine prop plane dropped my family off when I was just a little guy deep in the Sapo rainforest. And our house was a bamboo mat house. My pet was a chimpanzee named Tarzan. And true. And then my friends called me Yamplu, which means white spirit. I would say, quit calling me white spirit. And they say, but that's what you are, Palmer. And I never got over that. But Liberians have a number of fantastic sayings. I want to share one with you this morning. They say, carry me halfway. They say, carry me halfway when the sun is setting and dipping behind the swamp and the palm trees. They'll say to their friends, carry me halfway. That means, would some of you come together and walk me to my village or to my home? Because in the dark, in the bush, really bad things happen. You have the boa constrictor, you have the five-step mamba, you've got the spitting cobra, you've got the crocodiles, and you have the Heartman. And maybe you don't know who the Heartman is. The Heartman works for the Grand Devil and the Witch Doctor, and he catches kids at night for human sacrifices. So that's why you say to your friends, hey, carry me halfway. It's really dark right now. And your friends don't just walk with you halfway. They always walk with you all the way home. You just say halfway to be polite. Because you do, because half of anything in life is just not satisfying, is it? If you stopped after your sophomore year, half a degree is no good. If your prof asked for a 10-page paper and you turn in 5, that just doesn't work. But here's what I've read about our spirituality in America. There's a professor at Emory University by the name of James Fowler, and he writes about stages of faith. He says there's 6 stages of faith. But then he says this, the kicker is he says most American Christians never mature past stage 3. Most never get there. And then educators and thinkers in spiritual formation, they agree with him. And we become okay with that. And I want to say that having a spirituality that is just halfway is not enough. And so my challenge this morning is to think about this, because I think I've put my finger, after the last 2 years of reading and writing, and why aren't we maturing more Christians in our churches and in our university? And I think it's this. I think it's because we lack a passion for justice. I see it over and over that we just don't talk so much in our theology classes and in our churches about justice. You see, the Bible, if you've read the Bible much, you see the Bible and Jesus Christ always connect spiritual formation with justice. And we don't see that. Some people ignore that. We can spend a lifetime ignoring that. When I say that, I think about years ago when I was in high school in Monrovia, Liberia, and I was in a van I was a senior and 17 years old, and I'm in a van with a bunch of kids heading to a Bible study. By the way, James Loder at Princeton says we have about 4 or 5 transforming moments over the course of our lifetime. This was one for me. And we're driving in this van to a Bible study, and all of a sudden this yellow sedan, they're taxis, and it's packed with like 7, 8 people. It passes the car in front of us on the right, it hits a mound of dirt, and slams into a steel telephone pole and rolls. And so I jump towards the door because I'm sure we're going to stop, but the guy driving, we'll say his name is Mike, he just keeps going. And so we start yelling, Mike, stop the van. And he won't acknowledge us, he just keeps driving. Now everyone's yelling, Mike, did you see the accident? And I knew he could help because he had been a paramedic before he came to Liberia, but he just kept driving. Finally we gave up. And then we get to this house where we're having the Bible study on that Wednesday night, and he puts the van in park and he calmly turns to us and he says, hey guys, I saw the accident, but I didn't want to stop because I knew if I stopped, I would have to give someone mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, and tonight I don't feel like giving anyone mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. As a 17-year-old, I was disgusted, and I quietly prayed in the back of that van, God, I will do my best to live differently. Because you see, not everyone sees that when people are desperate and oppressed and treated unjustly around us, it's our responsibility. Jesus used to tell stories about this, didn't he? He talked about a Samaritan on the side of the road. Not a Samaritan, it's the story of the Good Samaritan. The man on the side of the road. And we call it the story of the Good Samaritan. I think maybe that story is most about the priest and the Levite. Because we read in Luke 10:31 that the priest comes along. He'd be like the pastor today or the theologian, and he walks on the other side. And then we read that the Levite comes along. The Levite is like the Christian. He grows up in the temple. He's like the Christian that never misses a Sunday, a Wednesday night, leads Awana. He's always there, and a small group. And he walks on the other side. And Jesus' point is, how can you go to worship and ignore the oppression and the injustice and the brokenness around you? You can't. So Jesus always makes this connection between spirituality and justice. And here's the thing, sometimes in some communities, in some cities right now, there are people who are walking the streets of their city saying, we feel oppressed. We feel like there's no justice and there's no peace in our cities. And we as Christians, sometimes we just go to church and we drive around neighborhoods and we drive around blighted communities and inner city slums as though it doesn't matter to us. And I want to say today it has everything to do with our spirituality, what we do or do not do for the oppressed and those who face injustice around us. I say that because sometimes in your own community you'll see something that's messed up, and I want to say it's your responsibility to speak up. I moved to Arizona about 10 years ago. My church is in the suburbs of Phoenix. And I'd heard that our sheriff has chain gangs. And I thought it was something of urban legend. And then one day I'm driving down Arizona Avenue and I see a chain gang of women in striped uniforms, chained at the ankles, hoeing weeds, with deputies holding shotguns. I was like, it looked like a scene out of a 1950s movie. And so I hung a U-turn. I couldn't take it. I put my car in park, and I got out, and the deputy points his gun at me, and I said, hey, I just want to ask you a question. I said, could you, and he said, okay. I said, could you tell your sheriff that in Chandler, we don't want his chain gangs. In Chandler, we don't want women put on display and shamed and humiliated like this. Because these women are made in the image of God, and they deserve dignity and respect. And he said, okay, I'll tell him. I said, you will? And he said, yeah. I said, okay, great. Well, a few months later, I see another chain gang, and I stop again, and I go through the same routine, and the deputy says, well, what do you want me to do now? I said, well, it's time to leave. And he said, and who are you? And I thought, ooh, who am I? And I just go with, I'm a pastor. And he turns to him, and he says, load up, it's time to go. And I thought, oh, well done. But then I tell my friends about the encounter, and they said, Palmer, maybe you shamed the women asking them to leave. And maybe, Palmer, you robbed them of their day to get out of the tent city. It's like a concentration camp. I couldn't win for losing. I felt terrible now. And so I decided the next time I saw a chain gang, I would take their orders. And sure enough, it wasn't long after that, our barista, we have a standalone coffee shop at the Grove. His name is Lawrence, came in my office out of breath. He said, there's a chain gang down the street. I said, grab your pad and pen, Lawrence, we're taking orders. And so we drive down there, and we put it in park, and I'm walking towards a deputy, and she says, halt, are you reporters? She sees the pad and the pen. I said, no, I'm just a pastor. She says, well, what do you want? And I said, well, Lawrence here is a barista. And Lawrence can make the most incredible drinks for these women. I just want to take their order. He can make a peppermint pumpkin latte. He can make a caramel macchiato latte. He can make a double pump espresso, fat-free, triple whip latte. You name it. He can do it. And she says, let me call headquarters. And so she calls headquarters. She's shaking her head. No, they're saying, and I said, ask them why. They got to tell me why. And she hangs up and she says, they said you can't because maybe you'll put a shank in the coffee. I was like, what? I'm a pastor. I don't even know how to make a shank. Do you guys know how to make a shank? I don't know how to make a shank. And she said, why do you want to make them coffee drinks anyway? I said, because I want them to know that the people of the Grove care about them and that somebody loves them and God loves them and that they have value and they have dignity and respect and they shouldn't feel shame for being here today. So I have this key idea I want to put on the screen for you, and I hope you take it home with you because we have this moral duty from Scripture, from Jesus Christ. And I've written this. The Bible makes a critical connection between spirituality and justice. We cannot separate spiritual formation from social justice. And you are God's means for spreading justice in this world. So when I use the word justice or injustice, what comes to mind for you? When we read it in the Bible, here's what it means. It means that you do all you can to bring balance to a society. You help a community regain its moral equilibrium. It means to be for justice means that you are fundamentally bothered by oppression and injustice. It means that you help to pull the poorest of the poor out of their poverty trap. That's what it means. It means that you do all you can to make sure every person, regardless of nationality or race or ethnicity or any other factor, is treated equally with dignity and respect because they're made in the imago Dei, because they're made in the image of God. There's three really critical thoughts that I want you to take home with you, and we'll put them on the screen here. The first is this. You can't miss that God is disturbed by injustice and he wants it stopped. And then the second thing is ending oppression and injustice is doable. And the third thing is you are God's plan for creating a more just society. And maybe you've never made that connection before because so many times we make our spirituality, what's right and wrong, very personal. It's just about personal things like don't drink, don't smoke, don't watch so much South Park, and you'll make it into heaven, all right? We're very heavy on the side of personal morality, and we're feather light on issues of justice. So I'm here this morning to say I hope I can change your thinking on that. So what's your responsibility as a follower of Jesus Christ to create a more just society? I want to start here. The first step, the first thing is to see and acknowledge the injustice happening around you. When we read Luke chapter 10, and you can look at your Bibles with me and hopefully you'll underline it, we read this in verse 31 and 32. We read that the priest sees him and he passes on the other side. There's nothing to see, is there? Nothing to acknowledge. The Levite sees the man on the road and he passes on the other side. They refuse to see and acknowledge. And you will never become, in my opinion, the godly person God made you to be. Your spirituality will remain halfway and half-hearted until you see and acknowledge the injustice that's around us. I didn't, for example, feel like the people at our church, the Grove, actually believe that 1.3 billion people live on less than $1 a day in extreme poverty. I didn't think they actually believed that millions and millions of people live barefoot every day, but all my friends ran barefoot in Africa. And so I told my church, I said, we're going to have a barefoot Sunday. That's what we're going to do, because now you'll know. And I told them, on this Sunday, I want you to wear your best and your favorite shoes to church. And then I'm going to ask you to take them off and leave them on this stage. And we're going to take the shoes to Africa and give them away. And then you need to spend the rest of the day barefoot. So you can empathize with how 1.3 billion people live. So you can walk the holy ground of a broken world. Well, I got home that night, and I have 4 sons, and we're sitting at dinner, and they all said, Dad, you've had a lot of bad ideas. But they said, this is the worst idea. They said, good news, Dad, no one's going to come to church on Barefoot Sunday. I get to my staff meeting, and they said, Palmer, do you know, one of them said, it's illegal to drive barefoot in Arizona? I said, I don't care. Who are you? And then, what's wrong with people? And then someone else says, Palmer, it's September, but the asphalt could be really hot. I think we should buy thousands of Japanese slippers for everyone. I said, I'm not buying the stinking Japanese slippers. That's the whole point. And so with all that encouragement, we kept planning Barefoot Sunday. And the morning of, my wife looks at her iPhone. She goes, ooh, Palmer, it's going to be a record high, 107. I was like, sweet, I told her. People's feet will sizzle on the asphalt. And they won't forget what it's like to go barefoot. Well, the good news is I get to church. My sons were wrong. We had a record high attendance in every service. And people left a mountain of shoes. I have a few pictures here on the stage. We've done this for a number of years. And then we took them to Africa, and I put college students on dirt bikes, and we gave them away deep in the villages of Liberia. This was after the Civil War, and now I just sent 10,000 more to respond to the Ebola crisis. Come with me, by the way. Come with me. See me downstairs afterwards. I need help. I have 10,000 on their way right now. So, and then, like I said, I told people to spend the rest of the day barefoot. And if they go shopping, if they go to eat out, they have to go barefoot. And then I started getting texts, like from my friend DJ. He goes, thanks, Palmer. My family just got kicked out of a restaurant. I was like, ooh, dude, sorry, where are you? And he tells me the name of the restaurant. And I don't want to tell you because maybe you won't eat there, and that's not my point. But then I started to think of all the restaurants that would not kick you out and let you eat barefoot. Wouldn't you think it'd be Denny's? But Denny's kicks him out. Kick him out. And I said, what are you doing at Denny's? You're so cheap. You know, that's what I told him. The thing is that not everyone gets the Bible's call to compassion and to respond to oppression. I had one man tell me this after a Barefoot Sunday. He said, Palmer, the African people won't need your shoes in heaven. And I was like, okay, but they'll need them on earth, won't they? And I said, are we going to wait till they die to put shoes on? Are you kidding me? And the shoes in many ways are a metaphor for how we have more than enough. Most Americans have an average of 19 pairs of shoes. But then it's the walking barefoot with the poor and empathizing with them is a big part of it. And then I had another man come to me. He used to be at our church. These kinds of people aren't at our church anymore. But he said to me, he was a leader, and he said, Palmer, you keep using the word social justice. Would you stop using that word in our church? Well, the problem is I'm a bit of a rebel, so all that made me do was bring like piles and piles of verses on justice the next Sunday, and for 20 minutes, I just read what the Bible said about justice. I brought a few of my favorite here this morning. We'll start with Job 29. Let's put them on the screen. I rescued the poor who cried for help, and I made the widow's heart sing. That's so beautiful. He upholds the cause of the oppressed. Proverbs, evil people do not understand justice. Boom. There you go. Isaiah, loose the chains of injustice and set the oppressed free. Micah, what does the Lord require of you? To act justly and to love mercy. That's our call. People who say, I'm not so interested in social justice, I wonder if they even read their Bibles much at all. Because justice is a raging heartbeat of the Bible. I'll say this next. I said, see and acknowledge. I think our next responsibility is to become a voice for justice and to speak out against the injustice. If we look, for example, in Proverbs, we read this amazing verse, Proverbs 31:9, speak up for the poor and helpless and see that they get justice. When you read the Old Testament, you read of prophets like Micah, Amos, Isaiah. Do you know we think they just talked about the future? It's not like that. They would walk through their towns and cities and villages, and they were a voice for justice. They would say, stop treating the poor so poorly. Share your food. Welcome in the immigrant stranger. That's what the prophet said. And you have a voice too. That's my point here. I have a good friend. His name is Scott Erickson. He's a live performance artist, and sometimes he travels with me when I speak. His family was from Africa, and he says, my art is a voice for all the women in Africa who've been silenced in their suffering. So maybe you're a painter, that's your voice. Maybe you do theater, that's your voice. Maybe you sing and you record music or you compose, you have a voice. If you're an athlete, you have a voice through sports, you really do. And everyone now, with social media, you can't just reach hundreds, you can reach thousands and millions through Twitter and Instagram and Snapchat and Pinterest. I don't know what happens on Pinterest. Some of you do. Hopefully none of the football players here know what happens on Pinterest, but some of you do. But you have a voice. When I say that, I can't help but think of a good friend of mine when I was a college pastor in Wheaton, Illinois. And when I was in Wheaton, I had a grad student as our drummer with our band. His name was Lincoln Douglas. Lincoln was from Trinidad, Tobago. And we were down in Cuba with a band. We took our band down there, and I'd taken a basketball team. And our basketball team is having dinner. We're having a pig roast with the Cuban Olympic team. And I hear one of their players, the Cuban players, ask one of my players, why is there so much racism in America? But nobody knew what to say. And so we're talking to Lincoln later. Lincoln's from Trinidad, Tobago. Just so you can picture Lincoln. Lincoln has a faux hawk. He always in the summer wore cut-off T-shirts. He's ripped and built like a linebacker, so picture Lincoln. And so we're having this conversation, and Lincoln says, there is a lot of racism in America. We're saying, no, there's not. It's not like that. He says, yes, it is, even in Wheaton. He said, when I first moved from Trinidad Tobago to Wheaton, Wheaton's like Mayberry, by the way. It's a suburb of Chicago. He said, practically every week, the police pulled me over for no reasons. My blinker wasn't out, my brake lights worked, I wasn't speeding, but it was the color of my skin. And he said, finally, Palmer, he said, I couldn't take it anymore, so I went down to the police station and asked to see the chief. I said, Lincoln, you went with your cut-off T-shirt and your faux hawk. You're lucky they just didn't taser you. And he asked to see the chief, and the chief agreed to meet with him. And he told the chief what was happening. Do you know what the chief said? The chief said, I'm sorry, Lincoln. I didn't know that was happening here. He said, Lincoln, what do you think we should do? And Lincoln said, I think we need to hold a diversity seminar. And he said, I think I should lead it. And the chief said, okay. And so the chief called in all the officers later, set up a conference room. And all the officers who had been pulling Lincoln over, they sat there while he told them what it's like for a man from Trinidad Tobago to drive through Wheaton. And things started to change. My point is, you have a voice. Here's the last thing that I want to say to you this morning is that at some point, at some time, you must act. In Luke chapter 10, we read about the Samaritan, and this is Jesus' beautiful picture. He says the Samaritan takes pity on him, and he took care of him. Listen closely to what I want to say here. My entire life, I've heard Christians say, preach the gospel. I've heard evangelists say, preach the gospel. I've heard pastors say, preach the gospel. I can't remember hearing very many people say, live the good news. Actually do the good news and stop the oppression and end the injustice. Bono has famously said this at a national prayer breakfast. He said, the one thing we can all agree on is that God is with the vulnerable and the poor. God is in the slums and the cardboard boxes where the poor play house. God is in the silence of a mother who has infected her child with a virus that will end both their lives. God is in the cries heard under the rubble of war, and God is in the debris of wasted opportunity and lives, and God is with us if we are with Him, with them. Let that sink in. God is with us. And maybe you're saying, why are you taking your theology in part from a rock star? Can I say this to you? Why are some rock stars writing better theology than many preachers? We need to change that. In my first book, True Religion, Taking Pieces of Heaven to Places of Hell on Earth, I mentioned Angelina Jolie and Sean Penn. And I got a lot of encouraging feedback and emails, but one guy writes me, he says, I'm bothered. There's haters out there, by the way, and he says, I'm bothered that you would tell us to follow the examples of Angelina Jolie and Sean Penn. I mention them because Angelina Jolie has twice flown to Africa to bring orphans home as her own son and daughter. Sean Penn, after the earthquake in Haiti, he went down there and he built a tent city for 40,000 people. And then he gets on CNN and he says, get down here and help me. Here's my question. Why are some movie stars living better theology than many Christians? That's what bothers me. And we can change that. You're starting to change that. And when you start to live that way, something changes in your own spirituality. If you feel there's something that's unlived, then start to give your life away and start to pursue justice, and God changes everything. I want to end with a manifesto I wrote. I wrote this manifesto for everything that I felt needed to change in the church in America. And it became the outline for my book, Barefoot Tribe, that came out last fall. And here's a manifesto. And just take these thoughts home with you. We will stop injustice. We will embrace people of every race, nationality, and background. We will become social entrepreneurs and empower fair trade. We will become modern-day abolitionists. We will end extreme poverty. We will stop the spread of pandemics like AIDS and malaria and Ebola. We will live simply. We will create more art and make the world beautiful. We will take pieces of heaven to places of hell on earth, and we will love like Christ always. Thank you for having me, Azusa. I'm going to be outside on the Cougar Walk. If you want to talk more, I'll see you down there.